Hey folks, if you're amongst those watching my streams, you may already have at least a partial idea of what you're in for today. Essentially, a while ago I received a review key, but it was only after a few grueling weeks that I was finally able to overcome Clover Bliss Grime. Part of this, no doubt, rests on my plate. I decided to play a Souls-like inspired Metroidvania without investing any points into health. I had a good reason at the time, I'm sure. That said, Grime's also just really hard. Which begs the question, did it leave me spewing all sorts of filth about how unfair the difficulty was, or was Grime dirty in all the right ways? No, not scandalously. I'm your host Arlyeon. Let's find out together about the violence. I was talking about violence. In the beginning, there was a pair of bodies floating within the void, locked in a weird embrace. Yes, I'm likely as uncomfortable as you are here. But then, with a thunderous shudder, new life stirred, as a diminutive black hole spawned into existence and gathered itself a shapely, nay, a perfectly proportionate form. Lacking purpose and guidance, this walking vacuum is left to its own devices. And, let me tell you, the world it discovers is not a friendly one. Every earthen surface is a horrifying amalgamation of rock-hewn limb and nightmarish ligament. And within this sea of petrified flesh and melted sinew are creatures which somehow manage to be worse. Stone given life and madness in the same breath, whose forms are so grotesque. This fucking deer with jaws for a head. This is just Tuesday here. Everything is the worst. Well, okay, maybe not everything, given there are denizens which aren't solely interested in smashing you into pieces and sniffing the remains, but it does take a little bit until you encounter them, and even then, well, they're either not that forthcoming, not all there, or simply unaware of the greater scheme of things. And that's really a fundamental part of Grime's mystery. It does have a story to tell you, one provided through both required and optional NPC encounters, the lore on items and equipment, as well as through the scenes you traverse, but it's not exactly spoon-fed you. What exactly is going on, the nature of the world and its denizens, and even the motivations of the people surrounding you, all of these factors slowly trickle in, at least until the game's climax. And while the finale does make a few things clearer, that just meant I had to bask in a growing sense of unease and dismay with each fresh revelation. Not that I wasn't already replete with regret, since, well, the game gives you a lot of opportunities to be a monster. Some optional, some not, but man, a few really hit hard for me, like, thanks for reminding me that art class is cancelled forever, Grime. God, feel bad enough as is. Oh, and, yes, there's multiple endings, but the decision leading them is a binary choice at the conclusion, which meant I just reloaded my save after getting the bad ending and saw the other, in part because there is no New Game Plus to tromp through. Though, before I get into that, I really ought to touch on core gameplay, because there is a lot to unpack here, and not just poor life choices involving character building. First off, while Grime is a Metroidvania, it really does feel the need to emphasize its Souls-like influences. The enemies, for instance, even when they're initially introduced, are more than capable of shattering you in a few swift hits. And even though you can take some solace in their attack pattern starting out as straightforward, it's really not long until you begin to deal with enemies bursting out from hidden nooks or sniping at you while you deal with other enemies, and all while you're navigating the limitations of stamina-based combat. And it definitely feels like a limit, as I lost track of the time where I found my dodge devouring my bar at the end of a combo, only to be left vulnerable to a quick and lethal reprisal by a boss or a gang of goons. And it was generally the dodge that did this, given your attack combos are fairly straightforward, as each of the game's myriad weapons has a small light combo as well as a heavy attack. And given that you don't really have complex combo strings to memorize, even when you incorporate the existence of light and heavy attack variants when you're in the air, it's generally going to be the dodge that does you in. But then that sort of makes sense given how much Grime wants you to learn how to parry, and by extension to absorb. See, your nature as a sentient black hole isn't just for show. If you manage to deflect an enemy attack, you'll empty out an entire red segment of their health bar, potentially one-shotting enemies who only have the one. I mean, provided you're not a goon and try to parry a glowing red attack. Those are unblockable and thus a one-way ticket to the pain train. And yes, the game does start to give enemies more complex health bars as you proceed, so you can't simply one-shot them, such as craggy segments you need to whittle through so you can gain access to their meaty red portions, as well as more red segments. But even with all that extra hassle, I still felt incentivized to engage in some batty binge eating. For one thing, you learn the traits of enemies you absorb, giving you access to a growing assortment of passive skills to finally tailor your character's ability set with, which synergizes with the more fundamental Souls-like process of leveling up one stat point at a time. That said, absorption also serves to help replenish your healing item, and given you only start with one charge, this can prove invaluable. This meant that as long as I was on the ball with my parries, I'd be able to recover from the loss of a charge due to some sloppy platforming on my part or a fight I flubbed. All the same, I am grateful that you're not just limited to the one charge, as provided you can hunt down the breath-infused mini-bosses hidden about the map, you can earn several additional ones by game's end, and given each one represented a full heal for me, because I had no health, well, it definitely helped avoid the game's death penalty, which, yeah, so Grime actually has an interesting take on the whole Souls-like death penalty element. Whereas most Souls games you encounter will see you vomiting up experience whenever you happen to drop dead, Grime instead only introduces you to its penalty after you've beaten the first boss and acquired the Ardor meter. Now, what's Ardor, you ask? Essentially, with every kill or absorption you make, you gain points in that meter, which in turn multiply all the mass, read souls, that you gain. So this can scale up to 100, doubling your sick gains, but dying has you lose all of it, necessitating you find your echo in order to replenish back half of your previous batch. It's honestly one of the most forgiving aspects of Grime, really, since it means you'll actually be able to spend all of your mass and potentially get back to where you died that much easier. Though, speaking of leveling, I probably should clarify something about those passive skills you've been acquiring from absorbing enemies. See, where each boss slain gives you an obligatory ability which helps to make your life easier and expand your repertoire, you're not quite as lucky with traits. Instead, they require a unique kind of currency in order to unlock and further upgrade in the form of hunt points. Essentially, hunt points are earned from extra powerful enemies found in each area, of the so powerful that when you kill them, they stay dead variety. I mean, there's also Crimson Ichor consumables, but those are super rare and super hidden too. So essentially, there's a very finite amount of hunt points, obliging you to carefully consider the kind of skills you want, the attributes you're building up, and the weapons you've been using and upgrading, which, yes, you have basic weapon reinforcement available to you once you reach the game's main hub. That said, while you should be careful about the decisions you make in regards to your character's progression, you're not completely screwed if you change your mind about the build, even with the lack of New Game Plus, and that's because of the existence of Motley Pearls, which completely reset all the hunt points you've invested in a trait for the cost of 1 pearl, and reset all of your character points for the cost of 5. While I never really used these, there was definitely something reassuring about having the option to completely change up the way I was playing and putzing around with something new. You know, if I wasn't busy being a parry/evasion resonance build and hugging the fine line between glory and death. Yeah, that said, as much as I have gone in depth on the combat, there is a lot more to Grime, such as the rewarding exploration and the challenging platforming, because yes, Grime provides variety in the ways it kills you. Like, initially, it's pretty damn forgiving. A basic romp through a cave system where your introduction to secrets will come from the occasional wall or floor you can break, or simply walk through. Having an enemy ambush you from a seemingly solid wall definitely helps to emphasize that you should be mindful of your surroundings and check everything. That said, you do begin to encounter spots that you're not quite able to handle. Oh no, you don't. but it does, and I don't like this. Ledges that are just a bit too high, or items tucked in unreachable nooks, things that taunted, tantalized, and provided me a lot of motivation to leave obnoxious markers all across my map as reminders to check these spots later. You know, once I earned my map, since while it's cool that I have a map marker, you need to find the beacon in every area to be able to actually mark down any of those notes about the area you're in. Like, it's not too bad early on, given that the game does give you some glowing lines which indicate when one's nearby, so you can activate it, but later on, it can take you quite some time before you locate them. The Carven Palace, a late game area, is an absolute clusterfuck of a maze because it's just an unfathomable unit in regards to being lengthy and winding in on itself, and just, it is so very easy to wind up lost there because of your general inability to see where you've been or where you need to go, save in the vaguest form of an objective marker. And by the time I found the beacon, I was nearly done with the place. It was with its acquisition that I wound up discovering a shortcut I'd missed, so it just felt unfathomably lengthy. And the thing is, yes, it's absolutely full of a lethal assortment of enemies, but you know what else it's full of? Challenging platforming, the likes of which only escalates from there. Yeah, I actually saved footage of some of the late game platforming puzzle segments because there's some absolutely daunting parts which are part of the main story, as well as some less than forgiving side segments. There's a couple of late game areas in the game which are expressly focused on platforming mechanics, and I was incredibly grateful that at least for 2 of these, they gave me regenerating health so that I wouldn't just kill myself with falling damage, given the sort of elaborate acrobatics they were asking of me. Not that it was going to be the fall that killed me normally, it was going to be the spikes, or the electrical walls, or just something. Though honestly, those paled in comparison to some of the grotesque nonsense I had to do in the Forest of Teeth. Which, yeah. Remember in the story segment where I was talking about the abominations that both populized and comprised the world? I'm not kidding. This game has the whole nightmare fuel as an aesthetic thing down pat. It's actually really hard for me to think of the last time a video game has managed to make me feel this level of squick.
Squick, caused someone to feel intense disgust. We get that bodily fluids can squick people out.
Like, the environments are gorgeous, don't get me wrong, but they're also sort of the thing that might disconcert you if you stare too long and play Where's Waldo Body Parts Edition. And that extends to the character models too. Like, glancing at the bestiary for that sweet lore occasionally felt like a mistake when I came face to face with a creature that I hadn't fully processed while I was fighting it. Thankfully, while the sound design does share the same attention to detail and love as the graphics, they're generally not as creepy. Generally, there is some disconcerting ambience, but it's fine. Mostly, it's a good soundtrack. Anyways, this brings us to our conclusion, and I have to say, squick. I really enjoyed my time I spent with Grime. It provides a legitimately disconcerting world to discover with satisfying combat and encounters to master, and yes, as much as I found the platform puzzles to be occasionally aneurysm-inducing, they also left me with a legitimate feeling of mastery as I made my way through them. Oh, and the fact that it's keyboard and controller compatible and let me tailor my controls for ease of use, I'm definitely a fan. And yet, there was something that stuck with me, a detail I haven't mentioned as of yet, and that's simply because getting around felt slow. See, while there are fast travel systems in Grime, they're a bit limited. Nerve passes allow you to flick between a sparse series of waypoints and should help to cut down on travel time, but well, not only are they limited in number, a fair amount of them are also cleverly squirreled away, so I wound up hiking across the map a lot. The fact that the movement abilities are trickled out fairly slowly with double jump being an almost endgame upgrade definitely factored into this sense of slowness as well. Like, yes, you eventually get bonfire travel, but it's after you beat the final boss, so it's not really relevant until after you're mopping up leftover secrets and achievements. Ultimately, I'm not saying that this ruined the experience for me, but there were times when I felt a bit trapped when I was progressing through an area, since backtracking to access a vendor or an upgrade point meant rather lengthy hikes. Still, I think it would behoove fans of Metroidvania Souls-likes and all things uncanny to give Grime a gander. It is a solid hit in my book, and whilst there are some flaws, it was ultimately an experience that kept me hooked and left me looking forward to the promise of post-release content. And I have seen a little bit for that post-release content, and they're adding a fucking dash, and I'm so happy. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And if you enjoy my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know there's a new release. And for the Discord savvy folks, you can click the video description to find a link to my community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you want to tune in to see me getting dunked on live in indie games, check out my Twitch at twitch.tv/Arlyeon. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks. Squick.